We're reading through the Old Testament book of Ruth this month, and today we're going to have a look at chapter 2. And Ruth chapter 2 is absolutely brilliant if you are practically minded and you want to look at what the Bible commends to us as good conduct in our day-to-day occupations. So have a think for a moment about what you're going to be doing in the week ahead and about what power you have in those contexts. And if you think power is a bit strong for what you have, what about influence? What influence do you have to set the tone, to bring about changes in attitudes? Because what we're going to look at in this chapter is pretty much just an ordinary day for one of the characters. Boaz is going out to the field pretty much like he does every day during the season of harvest, to oversee operations. This is his day-to-day occupation, nothing particularly special or out of the ordinary. Our occupations may be different. Some may be paid occupations, some may not be. Some of us might make things, some of us might repair things, some of us might teach people, some of us might care for people, some of us might serve people, some of us might sit at a desk and talk on the phone or on Zoom, some of us may be dealing with people face to face. So I'm talking about our day-to-day occupations in the broadest sense. And this chapter invites us to learn some things from this character Boaz. If you want a bit of background, you can find a look at the previous chapter, chapter 1 on YouTube, our YouTube channel, and on our website. But in brief, what we have is Naomi and her daughter-in-law Ruth coming to Bethlehem. Both of them have been widowed. And although Bethlehem is Naomi's ancestral home, Ruth is a foreigner there. Ruth is a Moabite. And this is what happens after they arrive there in Bethlehem.
Now, Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favour." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech.
Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they answered. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, "Who does that young woman belong to?" The overseer replied, "She is the Moabite who came from Moab with Naomi." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, "Why have I found such favour in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people that you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." "May I continue to find favour in your eyes, my lord," she said. "You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants." At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she had sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. Then she got up to glean, and Boaz gave orders to his men. Let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her. So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah.
She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she'd left over after she'd eaten enough. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she'd been working. "The name of the man I worked with today was Boaz," she said. "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." She added, "That man is a close relative. He's one of our guardian redeemers." Then Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain.'" Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed." So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
The Lord be with you. If those words are familiar to you, then you've probably heard them spoken inside, in a church, at the start of a church service, and usually probably by a vicar or a minister of some sort. The Lord be with you. But here, look at this, verse 4, we see them being spoken by Boaz, who is not a church minister. He's a farmer. He's not indoors. He's in the fields. He's not speaking to a congregation ready for a service. He's speaking to the people he works with. Now, they're obviously quite happy about that because they reply, "The Lord bless you." I don't know what would happen if you work in an office, say, and you wandered in the morning and announced, "The Lord be with you." Maybe it won't go down as well as it did for Boaz. Maybe it's just a quick way to get people to regard you as annoying. But the underlying approach to arriving to work like this is surely excellent. The first thing he does is not to start complaining about things or gossiping about colleagues. The first thing he does is to express a prayer that the true God of the universe will be with those he is working with in the things that they are doing. A great way to start the day, isn't it, as you enter your place of occupation, whatever that may be. Even if maybe in some circumstances it might be wiser just to pray it quietly. The next thing that happens is that Boaz notices Ruth, verse 5. What is Ruth doing? Well, she's gone to the fields to glean. I said last week that there were no state benefits in Bethlehem in the 11th century BC when this is set. But there was provision in the law of God for the protection of the poor and the foreigner. In particular, there was this law written in the book of Leviticus. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Leave them for the poor and for the foreigner residing among you. I am the Lord your God. So when the harvesters went along, picking up the barley crop by hand, of course, in those days, and tying them into bundles, there would be some stalks that would fall to the ground, and they were to be left there so that those in the community who were poor and vulnerable and marginalised could come along and pick them up. That is the act of gleaning. And then they would have something to eat. That is why Ruth is there in the field. In God's economy, the point is not to squeeze out every ounce of profit which you possibly can. In God's economy, if you are blessed with a harvest, then you should share some of it with those who are not fortunate enough to have the same standing in life as you do. Boaz knows that, and Boaz allows for that. And if you think about the relative positions in society that Boaz and Ruth have, you could understand it if Boaz were simply to do his duty and make sure that there was some barley to glean and just leave it at that. Because what is Boaz? Well, he is a man in a patriarchal society. He is an Israelite. He's a landowner. He's wealthy. He's a man of standing, as verse 1 tells us. And what is Ruth? Well, Ruth is a woman in a patriarchal society. She is a foreigner, a Moabite. She's a gleaner. She's poor. She's an outsider. In terms of the social structures of the day, there's no reason actually why Boaz should even talk to Ruth. But as we see as we read on, Boaz goes above and beyond what God's law requires of him. So, verse 5, Boaz notices Ruth. And if you have a suspicious mind, you may think that he notices her because she is attractive. I worked in an office environment once in a fairly male-dominated context, and I remember well the buzz that there always was when there was a new girl on the scene. But I think we can safely pack away that suspicion. Boaz addresses Ruth as my daughter in verse 8. And as we'll see, he wants to make sure that she is protected. From our author's point of view, the reason that Boaz notices Ruth is that he has a care and a concern for those who are working around him, especially someone who is potentially vulnerable. So in verse 8, Boaz says, my daughter, listen to me, don't go and glean in another field and don't go away from here. Stay with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. Boaz notices Ruth and he speaks to her and he looks out for her. He makes sure that she is protected. Clearly it wasn't safe for a single foreign woman in Judah at that time. Naomi points this out too in their conversation at the end of the chapter in verse 22. Boaz makes sure that Ruth will be safe. I wonder if your place of occupation is all it should be for women. Is your place of occupation all it should be for ethnic minorities? The sad truth is that many of our workplaces historically have not been and are still not. We might personally want to say, I'm not racist. We might personally want to say, I'm not sexist. But if we don't do anything about it when we see racism or when we see sexism in our places of work, then effectively we are supporting the status quo. Boaz uses the power and the influence which he has to make a positive difference to Ruth's experience. Admittedly, he is the boss, so he has a lot of power and a lot of influence. But surely there's an encouragement here for all of us, if we have any power and any influence, to use what we do have to improve the lot of others. Well, there are a few more things to notice here. Mealtime in the day's harvesting comes, and Boaz realises that Ruth, who is so poor that she has to glean for barley, probably hasn't brought a packed lunch with her. So he calls her over, verse 14, and invites her to have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar, sort of the ancient Bethlehem equivalent of salt and vinegar crisps. And it's not just that he provides for her that matters. It's that he includes her in the social gathering of his workers. The verse continues by telling us that she sat down with the harvesters. As the outsider, the immigrant, it's not difficult to imagine that she might have been ignored at break time, left out, abandoned to her own company, whilst everyone else laughed and joked and told stories as people do at break time. But Boaz includes her. Again, we don't have to dig very deep for the application here. Who is there in your place of occupation who could so easily be left out? And what part might you play in rectifying that? Well, there are other things to see in this chapter, but look, what ties them all together is the Hebrew concept of shalom. It's not a word which appears in the book of Ruth, oddly enough, but it is exactly what Boaz brings to Ruth in chapter 2 here. Shalom is often translated into English as the word peace, which is okay, but it is more than that. Shalom is to do with wholeness. It is to do with completeness. And what we see in this chapter is that Boaz ensures that Ruth's work is productive. He encourages her. He praises her. He prays for her. He makes sure that she has water and food. And he protects her. And he includes her in his community. This is a picture of shalom. It is a picture of what God wants to bring. And Boaz's role here is not just important within the book of Ruth itself. His role reaches out beyond those confines in a prophetic sense. As I said last week, the story of Naomi and Ruth is the story of us. And as the scriptures unfold, what we discover is that Boaz is a worthy ancestor, not just of King David, as the book itself will ultimately reveal, but through David, it turns out that Boaz is a worthy ancestor of Jesus, the Saviour, the ultimate bringer of shalom. As the book of Colossians tells us, speaking of him, for God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. I hope that this chapter of Ruth encourages you and emboldens you in whatever place of occupation you find yourself in this coming week, to use any power and any influence you may have there to be a practical agent of God's peace. The Lord be with you in that.